Welcome back to the Village News in Review. I am your host, Adrianne Shropshire, joined by our co-host, Anoa Changa-Peck.
Hey y'all.
Per usual, there is a lot happening this week, and a lot of it not great. I know you have been paying attention and following to the story that many people have been paying attention to. So we'll just kick off with that, which is what's happening in Gary, Indiana right now, where tens of thousands of residents in Northwest Indiana are still without power, as somehow the national news, until maybe today, hadn't picked up on what is an actual crisis, where folks have been without power for nearly 2 weeks now. So they're saying that power will be on Tuesday, but that's still days of people being without refrigeration, people being without lights, no street lights are on. I'm sure folks have seen all the social media posts. I had to call my cousins to be like, hey, are y'all good? Do people have power? Do you need anything?
Yeah.
It's terrible in the middle of summer, where it's hot and there's no relief, and people are suffering. And the response has been absolutely insufficient for this Black city, where people are struggling.
Absolutely. I've seen some of the updates from the utility company, like, oh, 300,000 people lost, their updates about restoration. And I'm like, that's cool. But the fact that we still have tens of thousands of people that don't have electricity, that don't have power, don't have access, and it's like going on way longer than originally anticipated, that's a problem. But when we look at these companies, these utility companies, they're regulated by our states, and in most states in the country, the governor is appointing the people who sit on these bodies that regulate these utility companies. So what they are and aren't doing, really does come back to like who our elected officials are putting in charge and how they're doing things. But like you said, Adrianne, it's almost 2 weeks. People have had no power,
Yep.
lost food, schools were closed, or they haven't started opening back. This is back to school time. And we have community that's filling in the gaps. I think there are some relief efforts, but it's a bigger issue because we have these storms hitting. They're straining a grid that in many places can't sustain a major hit, obviously, right, from what we're seeing. And this is the type of thing that we should be able to like not have to sit and think, oh my God, almost 2 weeks without power, with all the other things that this country, we're supposed to be so great, but yet here we have this type of thing happening.
Yeah, and people being forgotten. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what it feels like. The fact that the national media did not pick up on this, and I could be wrong, right? But I didn't see a news story until today after the fact, right? And
Saw
it's
people on social media talking about it first before I saw it in the news, and you and
right.
I are looking at the news every day.
And the reason that the mainstream news picked up on it is because people were talking about it on social media, right? So people are like putting out their story, their videos of driving down their streets with no lights, going into grocery stores where there's no refrigeration because there's no power.
Yep.
Right, people standing outside in parking lots, doing a mutual, or getting mutual aid, and so it is social media once again that force mainstream media to say you have to cover the story, but there still isn't enough coverage on it. Particularly because the thing that you said about there are some relief efforts, right? I think Law for Black Lives put out a blast asking folks to donate to the Legacy Foundation. I think there are some other relief efforts, but I would say that if folks are watching, this would be a thing that you could do to help out the folks in Gary, Indiana, is to find one of the places that you can donate, and help out. People are still suffering.
Again, it's great. People are able to fill in the gaps and community shows up because we know that we take care of each other. We keep us safe. We sustain ourselves, particularly when we're talking about like it's what Black folks have always done. But at the same time, we always talk about people are just like, we're an emergency, not even disaster away from like financial ruin. Like what this has done, folks have been out of work, the lost food, lost wages, like all types of stuff. Like this should be the time where we should be able to rely on, government of leadership. This is why we pay taxes. This is why we're in civil societies, for things like this to not have to be a burden on individuals. And yet here we are.
Right. Well, and it also speaks to, and you sort of alluded to this when you talked about that the governor appoints people who sit on these utility commissions, et cetera. But it also just raises this larger question about climate change, climate disasters,
Yeah.
right? We talk about natural disasters, but they're really not natural disasters, right? They're being caused
Yeah.
by people, right? They're being caused by corporations, they're being caused by greed, and the response then is also being bungled, right, by humans. And so we talk about these once in a century, once in a whatever things that are happening every year now, and we simply don't have the investment in infrastructure, right? We don't have the investment in alternative power sources, right, that would help avoid some of what we see. I've obviously seen here in California, right?
Yeah.
When we think about both the fires that were in the Palisades, in this sort of once in a lifetime, I guess maybe we'll see, windstorm that
Yeah.
like a hurricane blowing through wildfires, and then also what we saw in Pasadena, which was very clearly started by the power company that burned down Altadena. So
Yeah.
that all brings us, I think, to this other connected dot, which is we're 74 days away from midterm elections. So when we think
Wild.
right. When we think about why we vote, right, it's not just to get personalities elected. It's because we actually need people who are going to go and address these issues, hopefully not after the fact, but like preventative stuff. And I know that people like to talk about poor, old Joe Biden. But Joe Biden came into office and was like, we're going to get this infrastructure done, right? We're going to fix this rural broadband, right? We're going to make, and so these are the reasons why we elect people. We're going to make sure that people have health care. We're going to do those things. And so we're 74 days from the election. We had a couple of races this week. I'm gonna not talk about them. I'm gonna give you a chance to talk about the highlights from the races that we saw this past Tuesday, and highlights might even be too like it really is like the bombshells, right?
The bombshells, the top lines. I mean, obviously, top of mind, I think for a lot of folks this week, and if you didn't know her name before, you know who State Rep Angie Nixon is. Angie Nixon is from Florida now. Angie was running for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Florida, and she won. She was outspent like 17 or 18 to 1. And I've known Angie for about 10 years before she ran for state house. And so that was pretty cool. To see.
She's an organizer in Jacksonville.
She's an organizer in Jacksonville. She runs a coffee shop, bookstore, Cafe Resistance with her family. That's really a third space. I got to talk to her for an article some months back about third spaces in Black communities. And so it's we've talked about this previously, Adrianne, about the DSA candidates or this or that or whatever. Regardless of what the organizational affiliation she may or may not have, like, she's Black progressive. She's committed to, people in general around Florida. And she's been a pain in DeSantis' side since she got elected.
I think that we need to be mindful of what is happening in this sort of ecosystem where people are painting labels on folks and trying to disparage them with labels, as if the idea of progressivism is a bad thing. It's completely insane, right? That we're these kinds of labels. I think that oftentimes when people, say, well, so-and-so's a centrist, those people are actually not centrist. They're actually right-wing, right? But the spectrum has moved so far that we call right-leaning people centrists, right? And so it makes it very confusing for people to think that progressivism is somehow some way out of touch, right? Way of thinking about the world. And it's really folks who have a certain amount of values. We talked about Angie Nixon. Angie wants to make Florida better for working people in Florida. That's what she wants. And so the idea that somehow that should be demonized is really, really kind of insane. Okay, I'm going to move us because while we're focused on the primaries and getting through these primaries, and getting to November, which we should all stay focused on. And so let me not suggest that anyone start thinking about anything other than November 3rd. But there is some motion around the 2028 presidential election. So we know that there's lots of people who it feels like they're running, right? We see them in our social media feeds and we can't figure out why, right? They got, Jay-Z beats in the background of their little videos, right? And so all of that is happening, right, in the backdrop of this election. But the other thing that just happened is that the DNC just announced their presidential primary early map. for 2028. And once again, South Carolina will be at the top of that list. Followed by Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Michigan, right? And I think that this is the debate that happened in the last cycle was about, should we continue to allow Iowa, New Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
States that are 90% white go first, or should we actually lead with the growing diversity of the nation and obviously the diversity of the Democratic Party by letting more diverse states go first? And so they just announced the early primary map. And joining us now is Bishop Leah Daughtry. Bishop Daughtry is an organizer, an activist, a political strategist. She is an author and a faith leader. She's also the co-convenor of Power Rising, which brings together Black women and girls to leverage their power. And Bishop Daughtry has served as chief of staff for the U.S. Department of Labor, and as the National Democratic Party, as well as she has been the CEO for not one, but two Democratic National Conventions. So there is literally not a better person to talk to about the 2028 Democratic presidential primary process than Bishop Daughtry. Welcome, Bishop, to the Village News. I was just laying out who you are and all the roles you've played inside and outside of the Democratic Party, for everything, obviously, from running Democratic National Conventions to being a co-convenor of Power Rising, which I have to say brings together some of the most powerful women in the nation across industries to have conversations and to talk strategy. And so I appreciate, I know you've done so many things. You're an author, you're all the things. But I appreciate Power Rising in the role that you, and the space that you all created, but also the role that you played there. So when I was thinking about who do I want to talk to about these shifts in the presidential calendar, there's obviously no one other than you that came to mind first to have this conversation. So welcome to the Village News, and thank you for taking the time.
I'm glad to be here. Always happy to be engaged with you in any platform, but so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I appreciate you. So before we get to 2028, because there is a tendency for folks to skip over the elections that are actually happening while they start running for president. But we are 74 days. I don't know if you do the countdown like I do, but we are 74 days away from November 3rd. And I'm wondering, as we have moved through this primary season and, are ramping up for the general election, if there are any takeaways for you. I feel like there's been a lot of hand wringing, a lot of debate about who's winning, who isn't winning. There's always debate about Black voters, which I'll ask you about later on. But are there any takeaways for you as we end the primary part of the midterm election season?
Well, look, I'll start with the petty, which is that in my next life, I want to be a pollster, because apparently you can be wrong all the time and still keep a job.
Bishop,
I need that. I need that energy.
Apparently, you can make up a whole poll, put it out there, and then when people call you on it, say, "Oh yeah, that was fake. We were just trying to see if the news media would pick it up." Apparently, you can do that.
It's crazy. I mean, when you look back, and El Sayed was supposed to win by 20 points, and same thing with Francesca Hung, and Francesca Hung lost, and El Sayed squeaked it out by 1 point. You just say, "What is happening here?" But I think overall what we're seeing is people, one, energized and engaged, which is always good for the democracy when people are willing to go to the polls to vote on what they believe in, and they're not sitting at home on the couch. So I'm always encouraged to see people so engaged and talking about the issues and really looking at the candidates. I think that's very encouraging, just for the democracy as a whole. And I think for the average voter, what I'm seeing is a hunger for change, a hunger for, and people's lives aren't going the way they imagined them. And they want someone who's going to help them achieve their version of the American dream, whatever that is. And I don't think anybody's version of the American dream includes $5 gas and includes medical premiums that are unaffordable, that includes folks, your neighbors being deported. Nobody imagined that when they think about the American dream. And so people are, I think, wanting folks that are going to fight for them. Some of them may be incumbents, some of them may be new voices, but what we want is somebody who's going to stand up for us and say, this is not sustainable, this is not what our government should be doing. In Washington, we have Trump, redecorating the nation's capital. Now we've got the horses on the bridge. Those statues are now all trimmed in gold. And it's like, how do we have money for this?
Right.
How are we spending so recklessly on things like the reflecting pool and a new ballroom when the American people don't have the basic necessities? Gary, Indiana still doesn't have power after almost 2 weeks. The people in West Virginia, where I do a lot of work, they're struggling. People want their lives to be better, and they want champions who are going to help them get to the better life that they want.
Yeah. Well, I think that is perfectly said, and right on target. A lot of the hand-wringing kind of consternation that we've seen over who's winning, which voters are going to vote for which kinds of candidates. I think it's good for the democracy. I also think that it's good for the Democratic Party for people to be in a debate about what direction, right, about what the values are of the party, because it brings other people into that conversation, right, as opposed to holding them out because no one will engage them. So I think that in addition to people being engaged and energized, you're also seeing new people in the conversation who maybe weren't in the conversation 2 years ago or 4 years ago. And so I think that's great. And I know that's what you mean by it's good for the democracy. But it also, I think, for a party that sometimes isn't completely clear on which direction it's going in, having more people involved in the conversation about what the party should be is a good thing.
Absolutely. And it can only get better. I'm not one for the labels, conservative, liberal, progressive. That's just not, I think those labels are not useful because there's no common definition of what they mean. And so, on any given day, on any given issue, somebody could be conservative, liberal, progressive, centrist. And so those labels, I think, in this whole dialogue have not been helpful. So to the extent that candidates are able to really drill down into what their platforms are, that is the most useful. We see it now with Angie Dixon in Florida, who the right-wing media is saying she's a democratic socialist. Oh my gosh, she's a democratic socialist. And she did an interview this morning where she's like, I'm a capitalist. I own a bookstore. I'm trying to make money. But at the same time, I think that my neighbors should have health insurance. And I think that gas should be a reasonable price. And I think that people ought to have a living wage. Those two things can coexist. And so those kind of conversations, like the one Angie Dixon is modeling for us right now, are really important because it just shows the swath of beliefs that we try to pigeonhole folks into a label, and it's just not people's reality.
Right. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we get toward the end of this election cycle in November, and then it will kick off with a vengeance, right, as we head into the 2028 cycle, which I guess we're already in because people are already running. But as we look ahead, right, we recently saw the DNC announced the presidential primary map. And once again, we have South Carolina up first, followed by Nevada and New Hampshire and New Mexico and Michigan and Virginia, right? Very diverse states for the most part. Can you talk us through a little bit about how this continues to be a shift away from the kind of old traditional map that the party used to put forward, and why it matters that this shift has happened?
Yeah, this actually started back in the prepared for the 2008 cycle, when we added a couple of states. That was when Secretary Alexis Herman and Congressman Price from North Carolina chaired a commission to look at the presidential primary calendar. And in that cycle, we added Nevada and South Carolina to the lineup. But you still had Iowa and New Hampshire first, and then South Carolina, and then Nevada. And so we began messing with the calendar back then. So fast forward to the last cycle, when we re-entered this conversation about the presidential primary calendar. And for the uninformed, I'm sit on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and so I'm a rules nerd. So every 4 years we have this conversation. Some years it nets a change, and some years it doesn't. So in the last cycle, we said, well, okay, what are we going to do in this annual quadrennial conversation about the calendar? And Joe Biden helped us make the decision. He told us what he wanted us to do as president of the United States and head of the Democratic Party, that he wanted South Carolina to move up and be part of the early states, what we call the early states. And those are the states before the window opens, is what we call it, the window when any state can hold their primary at any date that they want to, before the window requires permission. President Biden made that very clear. He wanted the calendar to be diverse. He wanted it to be more reflective of who the Democratic Party is. And that meant that New Hampshire had to move and could no longer be first in the nation. It was quite traumatic for them.
Yes, I recall.
We removed, yes, it was quite something. And Iowa was completely out of the early window, which was traumatic for them. So fast forward to this cycle. Now we're looking at it again, and Ken Martin wanted to review it from top to bottom. And so we had a process where any state could apply to be in the early window. And we wound up with 12 states that applied, 12. And we heard presentations from all of them. And we have been actually working on this over the last 9 months, endless meetings, day, person sessions, hearing from states, batting around what could happen, what would happen. And the standard was rigorous, fair, and efficient. Rigorous, there's a test the candidate. Fair, so that whether you had no name recognition or a huge name recognition, it would be fair to you, and efficient, so that any campaign could compete. And it wouldn't just be those who had a lot of money who walk into this with size 25 sneakers, but any candidate could make their case to the voter. So that meant small states where the media markets don't cost as much. It meant rural states. It meant small town states. It meant urban areas. So we wound up with this calendar that takes the historic measure of moving South Carolina to first, which means that Black voters have the first say on who the nominee will be. All of the candidates, and we know we're going to have 792 people running for president. They will have to go to South Carolina and make their case to predominantly Black, small town and rural voters about why they should be president of the United States. And if you can't talk to those voters, you have no business being our nominee. And so that's what we rejiggered and took a hatchet to the whole thing and came up with this new calendar that moves South Carolina first, and then Nevada, and then New Hampshire is now third. We added New Mexico to the mix. We added Virginia to the mix. Michigan was there from the last cycle. So it's a very diverse calendar that takes into account all of the large segments of the Democratic Party and where a person would have to go in order to win the nomination of our party.
Okay, so this is not the first time, obviously, that South Carolina has gone first. And we talked a little bit before about the consternation when that happened, the rupture, it seemed, for people when that happened before. But in that moment, and the President Biden said many times about the importance of the party and this process reflecting who the party is, who the country is. And he particularly talked often about Black voters, about Black women in particular, right, but Black voters generally. So I was talking to Cornell Belcher recently about the need to invest in the mobilization of Black voters. So I know that we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm across the country, a lot of enthusiasm in our community. But one of the things that Cornell and I talked about is that this is sort of a moment that we haven't seen in terms of Black voters being willing to get out and participate, that we haven't seen because of the attacks on voting rights, right? Because the clear attacks on our history, right? In the attempt to erase Black folks from history as well as from whatever public space this administration doesn't want us to be in, that Black voters are very clear about the work that needs to be done right now. What is not matching that enthusiasm is the investment in the turnout apparatus that's necessary to get Black voters out, or in the political consulting firms, the Black political consulting firms that have the expertise and knowledge to be able to have the right conversations with those voters to make sure that they show up at the polls. So I just want to talk to you for a second about this mismatch between what could be a historic moment of Black voter turnout and the lack of resources going into organizations across the country who do precisely the kind of mobilization that's necessary right now.
Yeah, and that's a good word for it, mismatch. And I think it's been this way for many years. I always say, "'Twas ever thus." It's just, this idea that we expect, which I guess is part of the fabric of the American ethos. You expect labor
Right.
without payment,
Right.
without investment. That, I mean, our country was kind of founded on that, right? So it's a theme that has been with us for 250 odd years, that we expect work to happen, even though we haven't paid for the work. And so that's certainly what happens, not just in the political sphere, but I think all across American society. We want things that we haven't paid for. We want the value of things without having made the investment. And so, you see it in, I got a nephew who's millennial and is like, you can't be the CEO, babe, because you got to pay your dues first. But there's this idea. And so we see that in the political structure, and it's maddening, it's frustrating, and every cycle, it's like it's Groundhog Day all over again, but just with a different set of white candidates. Now, what's interesting is that the white consultants don't change much.
Or at all.
They seem to be the same people. And we've all talked about it. I love James Carville, but he hasn't run a campaign since 1992. Why is he still the expert? David Plouffe's a nice guy. I mean, his last candidate was Obama. That was 2012. I mean, why are they still the experts 10, 20, 30 years later? And honestly, Adrianne, I'll tell you, I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah.
And we are, as Black people in this country, are in a conundrum because there are few alternatives for us in the political sphere. Because I'll say, as a Democrat, there is nothing that is happening in the Republican Party that would make me vote for them. And I say often to my Republican friends, if y'all could just get a little bit reasonable, you could pull some of us, but y'all have there's nothing in your lexicon that says we should be for voting rights or we should be for healthcare. And so it leaves us saying, okay, I'm caught between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Yeah.
And for me, I'll take the sea because maybe I can swim.
Right.
I ain't fighting the devil because I know I'm going to burn up with there. But, if I choose the sea, I might find some broken pieces to hold me up, and I might be able to swim to shore. Right. And it's a challenge for us. And I think we've got to look at things like the Working Families Party. We have it in New York. I voted for the Working Families Party. I appreciate them because they're building an apparatus. It's not national yet, but they're building an infrastructure and an apparatus to run candidates, and often their candidates also run on the Democratic line, but you can kind of see their trajectory in building a set of issues and a platform that gives us something else to think about.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what I was saying earlier, like that there is this sort of contestation that's happening, and I'm not afraid of it, right? I
Mm-hmm.
know that there are lots of people out there who are trying to, spending a lot of money, quite frankly, right, to diminish candidates, right, to diminish organizations, but I actually think that this is a good thing to be talking about what is the future of any political party need to look like in order for it to represent the folks that it is trying to pull into its coalition. You can't just pull people into your coalition and then
Mm-hmm.
say, thanks for being here, but we're going to go
Mm-hmm.
do this other thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this sort of conversation that's happening, I think is really good. And I think that, to your point, I mean, I used to vote when I lived in New York. I voted on the Working Families Party line all the time, because I was trying to send a message about what I wanted to
Yeah.
see, values that I wanted a candidate to understand, were my values, the priorities that I wanted the candidate to understand were my issue priorities. And so I think that this is we're actually in a good place. We're going to come out of this, I think, and you tell me, but I think that we come out of this period with something that looks very different, than what we understand to be the political parties right now. I don't know that, I don't even know that the Republican Party can sustain itself as a MAGA party. I know that
Mm-hmm.
people will try, right? Because that too is, the history of this country. But I don't know that they can sustain themselves being a party of racists and bigots, and try and represent wide swaths of the nation. I
Right.
also don't think that the Democratic Party can be as rigid as it is right now, and think that it is going to continue to represent, the big tent that it's represented. And quite frankly, right, it is the remnant of the Civil Rights Coalition, and so you have to embrace that. If you're the Democratic
Mm-hmm.
Party, you have to
Mm-hmm.
embrace the fact that you are,
Mm-hmm.
the offshoot, right, of the Civil Rights Coalition and all that that means. But it
Yeah.
does seem to me that something different is coming out the other side here.
Yeah. And to that I'd add, Adrian, I think two places that don't that we need to lean in terms of responsibility for some of what's happening now are the candidates
Hmm.
who do the hiring
Hmm.
and who select the consultants and who select the contractors. And I don't think that they often pay as much attention as they should. And that's black and white candidates
That's
and
right.
Latino candidates
Hmm.
who could contract differently,
Yep.
who could choose different consultants. And they fall into the trap too of saying, well, they've done, I want to do this. And we've got to hold all of the candidates. Consultants aren't hiring themselves.
That's right. Yep.
Somebody's hiring them. So how do we make candidates responsible and accountable to us, the voters? And the other thing I think that we as black consultants and black organizations have to do a better job of is our own coordination with each other.
Yes. Yes.
Because, resources are scarce.
Hmm.
We've been put in a position where we are too often fighting against each other for the same little corner of money, while the white people are getting all the money over here. We're relegated to this one little pot, and so we love each other, we work together all the time, but we're having to compete against each other, which is just crazy. If I had my magic wand, as my friends say, I'll use my magic wand, I'd get us all in a room and say, okay, let's do one big proposal. Let's do one thing that we take to the party and say, you will fund this.
Hmm.
And we will work out among each other who's going to get what,
Hmm.
who's
Yep.
going to handle what. I
Right.
know what I'm equipped to handle is not what you're equipped to handle. And so you take it and run. But I think if we could figure out a way to check our organizational egos sometimes
Hmm. Yep.
and just come in the room and say, we want $100 million or $250 million, and we'll run this for you. Don't get in the middle of our politics and don't get in the middle of choosing one over the other. We're coming as a united force, and this is what we want. And for this, you get this.
Right, and we'll sort it out on our end. We'll figure out what each of our lanes are. We will do
Exactly.
the things that need to be done to make sure. I think I think that's right. But it also speaks to, and this is the last. I'm not going to hold you, as they say. But the last thing that I will say is that there is something about the sort of donor ecosystem that is problematic and challenging as well.
Oh my goodness.
Right. The both the donor advisors, the strategists that are that are saying to moneyed people, like, this is the investments you should do, these are the investments that you shouldn't do. There's been a big sort of really unfortunate, there's probably a stronger word that I could use, but an unfortunate debate within that ecosystem about funding field, right? Funding the work that actually mobilizes the voters, funding the people to go out and have conversations with the voters that we need to turn out. There's actually a debate about whether or not that should be funded. That seems crazy to me, right? Because Bishop, what happens is when you say we're not going to fund field, you are actually saying we're not going to fund organizations of color, right?
Mhm.
Because the primary work of Black and brown organizations in an electoral ecosystem is to do the field work that's going to mobilize.
That's right.
And so when you say, and you may not be saying it intentionally, or you may be saying it intentionally, but when you say we're not going to fund field, you are saying we're not funding Black organizations. That's just the reality of the types of lanes that people are in, right?
Yeah.
If you say you're funding media and television and mail, you're funding white firms and white organizations to do that. You're not actually funding the broad coalition, and so that concerns me, that that's a debate because of what the real implications are for our organizations.
And you're exactly right. And what it amounts to is a dismissal,
Mm-hmm.
and an erasure of the fact that communities organize differently.
Yes.
And these folks want to put us all in the same box, that we are all getting our information from TikTok and some digital thing. When I know in Brooklyn, I better go knock on Miss Mamie's door
Yes.
and have a conversation with her
Yes.
through the gate.
Right. Yes.
Right? But it's the neighbor to neighbor. Hey, we not organizing. Even our young people
Mm-hmm.
are not necessarily organizing via TikTok and getting information via TikTok. It's a different way. And when you don't accept that, and you try to shoehorn us into an understanding of what you think
Right.
is the way to reach people, then it's really a form of erasure, and it's a form of dismissal. That's unfortunate. And what they should do is take a lesson from Angie Nixon,
Mm-hmm.
who was completely outspent, completely outraised, 16 million to one. But what did she do? Door to door. Button, doorbell to doorbell. I curate, as you know, Black Lady News.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out every Friday. Y'all go sign up for Black Lady News on Instagram and on the website. And I put in the news, $16 million couldn't beat one doorbell.
Right. Yep.
Because that's how she won.
That's right.
Was the way that we know how to do organizers. She went to those she beat his butt in rural communities because she went and she knocked on doors and she had conversations. And so she won in places people were not expecting her to win. And she didn't win by a small margin. She won by 10 points.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But she turned the organizing on its head, and it wasn't about she didn't have the money for TV ads.
Right.
She didn't have the money for the digital ads. What she had was shoe leather.
Right.
And a bunch of organizers who joined her. And so, to your point, when these funding mechanisms and these donor advisors are thinking about AI and this and the sexy thing to do with digital,
Yeah.
you're completely dismissing the efficacy of how we know how to organize our people, our voters on the ground in the streets, and it's not on TikTok.
That's right. And dismissing and dismantling.
Yes.
Which is the other part, right? And
Mhm.
so I want us to just keep our eye on that.
Yes.
I have no doubt, as I know you have no doubt, that our communities will continue to do what we've been doing in the primaries, that we will get organized for 2028. I have no doubt that we're going to do that work, but it sure would be a lot easier if folks would actually just say, we understand the importance of this particular vote, and we're going to make sure that these communities are equipped to save democracy, right? Instead of not just saving democracy, on a shoestring budget. That's not how it works.
The stakes are too high. The stakes are
Right.
much too high.
That's
Even
right.
this November, the stakes are so high, and for all the people who are fussing about, I said, you know what? We need to get the Senate back. We need to get the House back, and the Senate, because Clarence Thomas is going to retire.
Yep.
If the Democrats don't take back the Congress, trust me, Clarence Thomas is going to retire, and his replacement, and he will be replaced by somebody even further right, and they will sit on that bench for 40 years.
That's right. Yes.
So we've got to think the way that the Republican Party thinks, which is the long term.
Yep. Yep.
The 30, 40 years down the road, we have not had the luxury of being able to think that far in the future, but some of us have to. Some of us have to begin to model. Project 2025 didn't get written in 2025.
That's right. That's right.
It took them 10, 15 years to write that. So when the opportunity arose, they were ready. They weren't putting it together. They weren't, stapling sheets of paper. That thing was done.
Right.
And they were ready for implementation because they had been thinking and planning about it.
And they had one term in office to perfect it. That's absolutely right. And I do think that we need to be modeling the future. We need to be thinking about the future. We are world builders, right? We as a people, right? We have literally created the United States of America out of a complete and utter disaster.
Yep.
And humanitarian disaster, right? So we have done that, and we will continue to do that. I'm just glad that you're in the fight, and that you play all the roles that you do. Many of them not easy, and so I want to say thank you for doing everything that you do for us. And I appreciate you for coming on and having this conversation with me about all the big things, but also about what feels like a very rough Democratic primary that's about to ensue the moment that we get to the other side of November 3rd. And so, but I'm looking forward to it. I think a lot of good. We've seen at different points when election season has produced, or campaigns have produced, the first Black president. So
right.
We don't know what's going to be. Everyone who's saying it's going to be this person or that person, nobody knows, right? And
nobody
so
knows.
We'll find out. It will evolve over time.
Look, nobody saw Barack Obama coming, right? Nobody.
Not even me.
Yeah.
I was like, who was that man? All right, Bishop Leah Daughtry, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adrianne. Thanks for all that you do to keep us on track.
Yeah, Adrianne. I mean, I'm gonna be honest that when I first heard about oh yay, South Carolina, the new 2028 map, I mean, I had a moment, I kind of rolled my eyes, but I think to y'all's conversation and to what Bishop Daughtry pointed out about this also, when we think about the order of the map, that's also where campaigns are thinking about where am I staffing up, where am I investing? And so having South Carolina front and center, having Michigan, Virginia, New Mexico, having this Nevada, this more representative electorate, that means people are going to have to be more strategic in their investments. They're going to have to come correct with Black voters, because I mean, South Carolina has also been seen in the primary as the bellwether for how the Black vote might shift, etc. Right. At times too. So I'm that was my initial cynicism, but I'm nah, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Both for Obama and for Biden, right?
Yeah.
They were struggling in them early states, right?
Yeah.
Both of them got to South Carolina and everything changed. Right. Yeah. And from that, and this is why, it is fundamentally true that there will not be a Democratic nominee of the Democratic Party presidential nominee that does not have to go through Black Democrats. There's just no way. There's no path to the nomination without having to go through Black Democrats. And so to your point about it makes the candidates have to think about where they're investing and how they're investing, it also forces them to have to talk about issues that Black and brown communities actually care about, right? You don't get to just go to working class white communities in the former industrial core of the nation and just talk to folks about economic issues. It means you have to come and you have to talk about, certainly you got to talk about the economic issues, but you got to talk about racism. You got to talk about the way in which this administration is governing based on bigoted and racist policies, right? You have to talk about voting rights, right? To talk about the erasure of Black history. You have to talk about opportunities and the Department of Education in a way that is failing our children. You have to talk about all that stuff. So it's important that these states are upfront because it changes the conversation early. Hopefully helps the candidates get their footing on talking about all the critical issues that are going to matter in 2028.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Adrianne. And it also just listening to y'all made me remind me of another conversation y'all had earlier this year after the passing of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. And there's like some really great coverage that you did. And also thinking about like Bishop Daughtry. There's so many amazing people that got their start as a result of his transformative campaigns in the 80s. But like what a lot of people don't credit and understand is that everything that he ran and did in the 80s set the modern Democratic Party. When you look at the, bringing back a Democratic president and just, what people benefited from in the 90s, like really that set in motion as a result. And there were just different reforms and changes that happened to the DNC as a result of his candidacy and his campaign. And so it has me also thinking about South Carolina in this way, not to put pressure on y'all in South Carolina, but like, that there is really like a tone and a tenor that has been already set by progressive Black leadership in, the party and in politics. And so when we see this build into South Carolina, and seeing the way like folks have been really trying to grapple their footing, especially at a time where people want to like write off, red states and Southern Dems and things like that. But this like sets a very different tone at a time that we need to really be thinking about what is the new alignment, not the realignment, but the new alignment as we move forward. So y'all got me. Y'all got me.
Well, I think that's right. It's also important to look back. I think it's a good point to raise about the progressivism of Jesse Jackson, because there's a lot of folks right now who are saying that they're more left than left, who are actually just reiterating Jesse Jackson's platform from 1988. So we'll take a look at that in the future as well.
Absolutely.
I think that's the news for the week. I want to just appreciate everyone again for tuning in and staying with us as we sort of chat through what's been happening in the news this week. We hope you'll join us again next week as we break down the news, bring on special guests to talk to you about other issues that you might have missed that are going on in the country that are important for us.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all. Like, share, subscribe.